Children of the Dust Bowl, the true story of the school at Weed Patch Camp. Author's note: the term Okie is used in this book as the Okies used it in the 1930s and still use it today. Although used by others as a term of abuse, to the Okies themselves it meant pride, courage, and a determination to accept hardship without showing weakness. Chapter 1, Mean Clouds. Life had always been hard on the farmers who lived in Oklahoma, and in the 1930s it was especially hard on those who lived in the Panhandle, a barren stretch of rock and red soil sandwiched between Texas, Kansas, and New Mexico. These people owned small family farms of 40 to 80 acres and were dry farmers. They had no irrigation system, no reservoir to store water, no canals to bring water to their farms. When there was enough rain, the Okies in the Panhandle grew wheat and corn and raised cattle. When there wasn't enough rain, they were forced to sell their livestock and farm machinery and borrow money from the bank. Every year they gambled with their lives, hoping for enough rain to get by. In 1931, it stopped raining in the Panhandle. The sky became bright and hot, and it stayed that way every day. Corn stalks in the field shriveled from the sizzling heat. Shoots of wheat dried up and fell to the ground. The farmers were caught in an impossible situation. They were already suffering from the effects of the Great Depression, which had started in 1929 when the stock market collapsed. The Depression caused the price of wheat and corn to fall so low that it made growing these crops unprofitable. Most farmers had borrowed money to buy their land and had borrowed again against their land in the lean years. When the prices for their crops fell, many couldn't make payments to the banks that held title to their land. By 1932, 1,000 families a week in Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas were losing their farms to the banks, and now it had stopped raining in the Panhandle, and the crops themselves were failing. Then when it seemed that things couldn't get worse, they did. The year was 1936. It hadn't rained more than a few drops in the Panhandle for 5 straight years. One day the wind started to blow, and every day it blew harder and harder, as if nature were playing a cruel joke on the Okies. The wind blew the dry soil into the air, and every morning the sun rose only to appear behind a sky of red dirt and dust. The wind knocked open doors, shattered windows, and leveled barns. It became known as the Great Dust Bowl, and it was centered in the Panhandle near Goodwell, Oklahoma. From there it stretched to the western half of Kansas, the eastern half of Colorado, the northeastern portion of New Mexico, and North Texas. In these areas, and especially in the Panhandle, the dry winds howled for 4 long years from 1936 to 1940. Frequently, the wind blew more than 50 miles an hour, carrying away the topsoil and leaving only hard red clay, which made farming impossible. In the flatlands of the Panhandle, people could see the dust storms coming from 20 to 30 miles away. The winds made the sky boil red, blood red, said Horace Clay Conley of False, Oklahoma. You could see the northers coming, he recalled. It carried that old red dirt, and the whole sky would be red. They were mean clouds, ugly clouds. As a child, Horace walked to school backward to keep the dirt from scraping him in the face. He remembered he was often let out of school to go to the family storm cellar where he would be safe. As the clouds rose and roiled each day, thousands of birds and rabbits raced in front of the approaching storms. That was the signal to the Okies to hurry before it was too late. They had to herd their cows into the barn quickly, tie down farm equipment and whatever supplies they had outside, then run for cover. Cracks around windows and doors were taped and stuffed with wet towels, but it was impossible to escape all the dust. At night, families slept with wet washcloths or sponges over their faces to filter out the dust. But in the morning, they would find their pillows and blankets caked with dirt, and their tongues and teeth would be coated with grit. Every morning, the house had to be cleaned. Evelyn Buckland of Wanaka said, if you didn't sweep the dust out right quick between the storms, you would end up scooping it out with a shovel. And every morning someone had to go check the animals. The fierce gales buried chickens, pigs, dogs, and occasionally cattle. Children were assigned the task of cleaning the nostrils of cows 2 or 3 times a day. The storms also created a charge of free-flowing static electricity in the air. If you touched anything metal, a frying pan, a pump handle, a doorknob, you could get a jolting shock. Some old-timers even say the static power electrocuted dozens of jackrabbits. The Dust Bowl killed people who stayed out too long without shelter. Roland Heem of Hooker almost lost his grandmother to one storm. I remember my grandmother hanging onto a fence post, he said. The wind was blowing so hard she looked like a pennant blowing in the breeze. However, more people died from dust pneumonia when the dust caused severe damage to the lungs. Bessie Zentz of Goodwell summed up a nightmare experience by the Dust Bowlers. She said, the dust storm scared us to pieces. It was as dark as the middle of the night, and it stayed that way all day. The storms ended any hope of farming in the Panhandle. The Okies planted mulberry trees for windbreaks and plowed furrows deep in the ground to keep the soil in place. But the wind blasted the seeds from furrows and whipped the crops from the earth. To survive, farmers took to hunting jackrabbits, and the Panhandle diet became biscuits, beans, and fried jackrabbit. Others took to hunting coyote, not to eat, but to collect the bounty offered by the state for each one killed. It was a time of desperation. From 1930 to 1940, the number of farmers and agricultural workers in the Dust Bowl states declined by approximately 400,000. By 1937, the unemployment rate in Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Texas had soared to 30%. Most of the Okies had lost their farms or were about to. Nearly 50% of Oklahoma's farms changed hands to bankruptcy court sales in the 1930s. When a farmer couldn't pay the bank, a tractor was sent to knock down his farmhouse as a way of forcing him to leave his land. Tractored out, as they called it. The Okies were broke. They were without land and they were hungry. And still the wind blew day and night, scraping all life from the earth. It's little wonder that the Okies named this period in their lives the Dirty Thirties. Chapter 2, Mother Road. The Okies drew strength from the winds that blew them out of the Panhandle. Penniless, broke by hardship and poverty, they were determined to conquer adversity. Crowding around campfires on an open prairie amid the ruins of their farmhouses and fields, they started to talk about a distant place where it was reported there was food, work, sunshine, and clear skies. California, California, California. To the Okies, the word California was magical, describing a place where they could go to better their lives. It was said that thousands of workers were needed to harvest 100 different crops: peaches, pears, tomatoes, potatoes, beans, apples, and oranges. The list seemed endless. It was said that no one ever went hungry in California because lush orchards were everywhere and people just helped themselves to whatever fruits or vegetables they wanted. It was said that no one ever got sick out there, ever. And it was big news if anyone died in California before their 200th birthday. Above all, the Dust Bowlers believed they would find work in California if they could get there. They believed this because growers in California sent thousands of handbills to Oklahoma and the other Dust Bowl states. Handbills said things like 300 workers needed for peaches, plenty of work, high wages, 500 men for cotton needed now, start work right away. When the Okies read these advertisements nailed on trees and old telephone poles, there was but one thing to do. As one man in Porum, Oklahoma put it, all you could hear was going to California, going to California. Nobody talked about nothing else except going to California. The advertisements for workers led to what is called the Dust Bowl Migration. It was the largest migration of people in U.S. history. Between 1935 and 1940, over 1 million people left their homes in Oklahoma, Texas, Arkansas, and Missouri and moved to California. Most of the migrants were white, but the exodus from the southwestern states also included some black families. Among the migrants, 375,000 Okies cursed the wind, the dirt, and the drought one last time and then set out for California. And what a sight it was. The Okies sold what few valuable possessions they still had: an old tractor, a plow, perhaps a cow that had survived. Then aunts and uncles, brothers and sisters, parents and grandparents pulled their money to buy an old jalopy or a beat-up flatbed truck. Soon the vehicle would be loaded down with tools, pots, pans, bulging suitcases, guitars, wash tubs, and mattresses. And always straddling the 10-foot-high mountain of family possessions, there were children, often 6 or more, whose job it was to make sure the rope stayed tight and nothing was lost. For others, there was nothing to sell, nothing to pack. Many of these Okies rode the rail to California, sneaking aboard empty railroad cars headed west. Some, such as Roy Abbott of Colgate, hitchhiked to California. Moving day, Roy said, consisted of calling the dog and spitting on the fire. For those with their own vehicles, an old car with 3 mattresses latched to its roof was called rich. A car with 2 mattresses was said to be mediocre. And if someone saw a car with just 1 mattress, they'd say, "There goes the poor Okie." While preparing for a trip of nearly 2,000 miles, which might take them from 3 weeks to 6 months, many Okie families sang the popular Jack Bryant song, "Sunny California," or "Sunny Cal." Then one by one, the overloaded trucks sputtered onto Route 66, which Okies called the Mother Road. Today, most of old Route 66 is closed or in a state of disrepair, but the Okies who rode Mother Road to California will never forget the blast furnace heat, the winding mountain roads, the bridgeless rocky paths, the washed out mud banks, the hunger and the uncertainty that threatened them every mile of the way. When Okies recall the Dust Bowl migration, they remember every town. First Shamrock and Amarillo in northern Texas, then Tucumcari and Albuquerque in New Mexico, on to Holbrook, Flagstaff, and Kingsman in Arizona, and then Needles and Barstow as they entered California. They remembered every hardship and every happy moment. Edgar and Myrtle Masters packed their children in an old Studebaker in Hollis, Oklahoma, and headed down Mother Road in 1938. They had 4 flat tires in the first 50 miles. Rosalind Young was 9 years old when her family of 5 and a cranky young couple with a loud toddler left Stewart, Oklahoma. Rosaline remembered that the family got caught in a flood in Gallup, New Mexico, and was forced to hide out for a week in a large tin building with 12 other families until the flood waters subsided. The Okies worked along the way. They might pick cotton in Texas to earn enough money to make it to Arizona in time for a lettuce and carrot harvest. If the truck broke down or they ran out of gas, which happened often, some of the men would hitchhike to the nearest town, get an odd job, and maybe earn 50 cents, enough money for repairs or gas the next day. At the end of the day, the families would camp by the side of the road and wash clothes, if there was a stream or a ditch nearby. They ate sugar-cured bacon brought from Oklahoma, stuffed in lard cans, and if they were lucky, they had a meal of boiled potatoes and carrots. They cooked outside, slept outside, went to the bathroom in the woods, bathed when they could, and did whatever it took to get to the next day. Lloyd Searcy's family, 8 boys and 4 girls, slept outside next to Mother Road. "With all of our blankets and sleeping bags," Lloyd said, "we look like a checkerboard all laid out." Comparing the trip to life in Prague, Oklahoma, Lloyd said, "We didn't have no running water or electricity, but we didn't have that in Oklahoma anyway." Lloyd Stoops of Chicada remembered when his family ran out of food and all that was left was coffee. The coffee was shared by the adults. Then the children took spoons and ate the coffee grounds. Once the Okies families reached Kingsman in western Arizona, they faced a new challenge. From Kingman, Route 66 wound upward into the cactus and shattered rock of the Black Mountains. As this stretch of Mother Road climbed higher and higher, the steep grade, the hairpin turns, and the absence of guardrails tested every vehicle and the determination of each family. Women and children often walked to the summit rather than face the perilous climb in an unreliable car. They carried wash tubs and bundles of clothing to ease the strain on the family's jalopy. Horace Ray Conley, who had described the sky above the panhandles as blood red, was 15 when his father's 1930 ton-and-a-half truck approached the foothills of the Black Mountains. It was loaded with 2 beds, a stove, a dining table, and a couch. When his father refused to take the wheel, Horace shifted the old truck into low gear and started up the grade alone. He climbed about a mile before the truck's clutch failed. 2 truckers from Maine fed cantaloupes to the Conley family and gave them a ride back to one of the many gas stations in Kingman. Once through the Black Mountains, the Okies had to prepare for their most severe test, crossing 130 miles of the Mojave Desert between Needles and Barstow, California. Here there were no towns and few gas stations. Here, fan belts snapped, radiators cracked, and floorboards turned frying pan hot in the daytime temperatures that frequently exceeded 120 degrees. The families prepared for this part of the trip as they were going into battle, checking tires and brakes, securing extra food, gas, and water. Most made the journey at night and always at a slow speed, keeping a steady eye on the temperature gauge. I used to tell them, a local businessman said of the Okies, it isn't surprising that you people die along Route 66. The miracle is that any of you make it through it at all. To help survive the hardest times, the Okies wrote songs. As they joined the caravan of rundown jalopies on Mother Road, they would sing. Always, they kept up hope. Hope that the truck wouldn't overheat. Hope that the tires would last one more day. Hope that there would be enough food and water for tomorrow. Hope that they would eventually light in California, and above all, hope that they could find a job when they got there. Chapter 3, Dead Time. The winding stream of Dust Bowl jalopies eventually reached Tehachapi Grade. It is a beautiful road that snakes gently through the Tehachapi Mountains of California, then shoots straight down to the San Joaquin Valley like a dangerous ski slope. For the Okie families who descended the grade, it was a time of rejoicing and laughter. All of their troubles suddenly seemed to disappear, for now they could see with their own eyes what they had only dreamed about for months and maybe years. For 2,000 feet above sea level, they saw a vast stretch of orchards, endless fields of grapes, cotton, and tomatoes, and as far as the eye could see in any direction, green. So much green it was hard to believe after life in the Panhandle. It was paradise, Trice Masters recalled. When we saw the valley, we started hollering and yelling because we knew it was California. We started singing and we didn't care. If we ran out of gas, we'd make it because we could coast down. When Patsy Lamb's family saw the valley for the first time through the windshield of their old Model A Ford, her father pulled the car off to the side of the road on a high bluff. Patsy and her 4 brothers and sisters got out of the car and stood in a line on the edge of the bluff, where they stared at the sea of green below them as if they were in a trance. Patsy was 10 years old at the time. When she turned away from the bluff, she saw her mother standing behind her crying. Then Patsy started to cry, and soon everyone was crying. From 1935 to 1940, an endless stream of ramshackle cars and trucks rolled down Tehachapi Grade. Patsy Lamb's family and the other migrants from the Dust Bowl states poured into the agricultural towns in the southern end of the San Joaquin Valley, Delano and Bakersfield, where advertisements said grape pickers were needed, Wasco and Shafter, where it was said field hands were needed for potatoes, Arvin and Lamont, where rumor had it that work could be found harvesting cotton, carrots, and beans. But the Okies soon discovered they had been misled about California. They started seeing signs at the edge of every town they had approached. No jobs here. If you're looking for work, keep moving. 10 men for every job. Everywhere they went, it was the same. Too many workers, but not enough jobs. The growers in California had advertised for more workers than they had actually needed, and now there was a surplus of farm labor. This suited the growers because the excess of workers drove wages down. A grower would offer to hire someone for 25 cents an hour to pick cotton, a poverty wage. If the migrant didn't take the job because his family couldn't live on 25 cents an hour, there were thousands of other workers who would pick cotton for 25 cents an hour to keep their families from starving. The growers offered 35 cents an hour for plums and nectarines, 25 cents for potatoes and lettuce, and a starvation wage of 2.5 cents for a box of peaches, $1 for a full ton of peaches. The average field hand worked 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, and earned $4 a week. But most Okie laborers couldn't find work for even a nickel a day. What California had to offer the Okies was more hunger and misery. In a pamphlet John Steinbeck wrote before publishing The Grapes of Wrath, he described the hardships the Okies faced during their first few months in California. He called it dead time. There is no work. First, the gasoline gives out. And without gasoline, a man cannot go to a job if he could get one. And then the food goes. And then it rains with insufficient food. The children develop colds because the ground in their tents is wet. I talked to a man last week who lost 2 children in 10 days from pneumonia. His face was hard and fierce, and he didn't talk much. So during dead time, the Okies lived in the bottoms of dry lakes, such as Kern Lake or Buena Park Lake, in tents and shacks made out of cardboard and tin. Others lived on ditch banks under bridges and in fields of weed and rock. These squatter communities became known as Little Oklahomas or Okie villages, and the people who lived in them had no work and nothing to eat except boiled cabbage and cornbread. California was one of the richest agricultural states in the nation, yet Okie children were starving. The farms often produced more than could be picked or sold, but if the Okies tried to help themselves to the surplus crop left on the ground, the growers would pour oil on the food, strike a match, and set it on fire, hoping the Okies would move on to another town. John Steinbeck saw this happen several times, and he called it the saddest, bitterest thing of all. Inevitably, disease broke out in the Okieville scattered throughout the San Joaquin Valley. The bad sanitary conditions and inadequate diet led to epidemics of dysentery, tuberculosis, and pneumonia. Even if we found work, one squatter said, the people starved. We were living like animals. The stories Okies tell about living in the squalor and filth of these camps is shocking and tragic. For example, when Nelda Oldham and her 7-month-old brother arrived in California from Ringling, Oklahoma, both fell ill with dysentery. Nelda recovered in 5 days, just in time to attend her brother's funeral. 6 months after arriving in California, Lillian Dunn's 17-month-old son, Donald Ray, ate a frostbitten orange that was part of the family's wages for working in an orange grove. Daniel got so sick, and Lillian took him to Tulare County Hospital for treatment. But the hospital said it didn't take Okies, and it refused to admit him. Donald died. Eventually, a rumor spread throughout the squatter camps, a rumor that, if true, might lead to a better life for Okies. It was said the federal government was building several farm labor camps where Okies could live until they found work. It was one of the few rumors Okies heard in California that turned out to be true. In 1936, the Farm Security Administration, an agency of the Department of Agriculture, started to build 12 camps in the San Joaquin Valley. By 1937, 10 of these camps had been completed. They were built to provide the Okies with emergency shelter and better living conditions. One of these compounds was named Arvin Federal Camp, located at the base of Tagapi Grade about 15 miles south of Bakersfield, near the towns of Arvin and Weed Patch. Because it was situated on Weed Patch Highway, the Okies called this place the Weed Patch Camp. So did John Steinbeck in The Grapes of Wrath. When the Okies heard the rumor about the camp, they knocked down their cardboard shacks, packed up pots, pans, washtubs, and mattresses once again, and headed back to the foothills of Tehachapi Mountains, where they had first seen California through their tears of joy. Weed Patch Camp was no paradise, but for the families who settled there, it was a vast improvement over life in Okieville. The camp housed about 300 people in one room, 10 cabins and tents on wooden platforms. It cost $1 a week to live there, but if the family didn't have $1, and most didn't, they could work off the cost of the rent by doing maintenance work around the camp. Jason Johnson traded his car jack for a tank of gas, which he used to find 2 days' work unloading lumber from a railroad car. He made $1.50, enough to move his family into the camp. Patsy Lamb's family got in by selling 10 sacks of potatoes her family had somehow acquired. The camp had hot showers, flush toilets, and breakfast for the children for a penny a day. Their parents could earn this much by finding occasional work in the fields and by doing odd jobs in Arvin and Lamont. On those occasions when the Okies weren't paid in money, they worked for a cup of flour or a spoonful of lard, which could make biscuits for the family meal. When it rained, the tents and tin cabins leaked, and Weed Patch Camp turned into a swamp of mud. Weeks might go by without finding even the poorest paying job. But friends were strong in the camp, and someone would always share a standard meal of bean and biscuit. Life seemed a bit better, too, because right in the middle of Weed Patch Camp, there was a makeshift auditorium constructed of scrap lumber that was used as a dance hall on Saturday nights. Here families would gather to sing and pick, playing an odd assortment of instruments that clattered and twanged: spoon, washboard, saw, and of course, banjo, harmonica, fiddle, and guitar. They sang the Okie tunes that gave them identity and strength, for the people in Weed Patch Camp had learned to accept hardship without showing weakness. "Now come on, everybody, quit that complaining," one woman said. "Every cloud has a silver lining. If you don't like things here in the camp, be nice enough to keep it to yourself." "Ain't no use to sit around and whine," one song advised, while another, Toe Sack Tattler, went like this: "It takes a little courage and a little self-control and a grim determination if you want to reach the goal." The Okies would need all the courage and toughness they could find. The Weed Patch Camp provided shelter and better sanitation for the Okies who lived there. But outside the camp, they still faced an uncertain future.